Hello and welcome back to our listeners to another episode of the Teacher Experience, where we explore the inspiring journeys, innovative strategies and heartfelt stories from educators around the globe. I'm your host, Miss Wild, and this is Miss Dearman, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Before we begin, if you have been enjoying this episode and our podcast, please click the follow button, share us with your teacher friends, and if you have time, leave us a review. Our guest today is Mrs. F, a dedicated primary school teacher from Scotland. With a wealth of experience in the classroom, Mrs. F is not only passionate about pedagogy and student engagement, but also a strong advocate for teacher wellbeing. Her insights have made a significant impact on many educators. In addition to her work in the classroom, Mrs. F is also the host of the popular podcast Inside Voices, where she dives deep into the challenges and triumphs of teaching with her co-host, Mr. Grant. Today, Mrs. F will share her journey as a primary school teacher, her perspectives on the evolving educational landscape, and her motivations for starting Inside Voices. Whether you're a seasoned educator or just starting your teaching career, this episode promises to be full of valuable insights and practical advice. So without further ado, let's welcome Mrs. F to the Teacher Experience podcast. Mrs. F, thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be a guest.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we always like to start our podcast with a WWW and an EBI. So that's a what went well and an even better if. So please could you share with us your what went well and your even better if from this week?
So I think this is actually a really good thing to do to kind of reflect on your week. I try and think of this on a Friday. I sort of try and take stock. But I think this week what went well is we kind of wrapped up a recent maths topic. We were able to get a lot of active learning done. And the response I just think is so much better when you're outside or you're doing something active. And the children really took to it. They absolutely loved it. We went outside and did a shape hunt in the style of a nature documentary. I honestly, watching some of the videos back, they were hilarious. They'd put like sound effects over all of this. They were lying in the grass, zooming in on like the playground, the climbing frames, talking about the cylinders that they saw in the wild. It was just, they really took it and they ran. It was so good. And it was just a nice moment to watch them all back together as well. I feel like we all just had that nice class moment together where we're just enjoying it, and you could really see the kind of joy in the learning that they had. I think what would have gone a little bit better, what could have been a bit better, is I think I maybe ended on a bit of a negative note this week, which usually I don't do. It was such a minor thing that had happened we finished on Thursday, we've got a long weekend. Thursday afternoon, it was just a minor thing, and it kind of just, just when one thing is said or done, and it just, you forget all the positives in the week. So it's quite nice to think, even though it didn't maybe end the way I wanted it to, it was a positive week overall. It was just maybe not ended on the best note.
Thank you so much for sharing those. I think it's really, like you said, the reason we do the what went well and the even better if is because it's such a common reflective technique that we want to also remind teachers to do it at the end of every week or the end of every lesson or the end of every day, because it really does help us think about what can I do better next week and what should I be really happy about this week. I absolutely love your what went well. I think that's amazing what you did with your class. And also how good to get that multidisciplinary stuff into their learning without them realising. So you literally had biology in there, music, maths, all of it, and they get to enjoy their day, their lesson outside. Just absolutely amazing. Your EBI, I think we've all been there. In reality, we've all been there. We've had some amazing things happen, and then one thing will happen that's negative, and sometimes without us realising we let it take over. But again, you've made that reflection and you can sort of take that into next week and remember that it's always good to end on a positive regardless of what's happened in that day. So thank you so much for sharing that. So what we would like to do now is understand what a typical day looks like for you.
So I am definitely an early into work person rather than a stay late person. Like I have said this from the beginning, and I just will always stick to it. There's something nice about getting home for 4 o'clock and just feeling like you have a bit of the afternoon left. So typically I go in, usually I'm in for just before 8 o'clock, which I know in secondary you guys start a little bit earlier, so we don't start till 9, so it gives me just over an hour. And to be honest, my morning is pretty much spent at the laptop and pulling out things that we're going to need for the lessons. Usually I get all of my admin stuff done in the morning because I think by the time it gets to the end of the day, I don't have the patience for it. I just don't have the energy to sit in front of a laptop. I need to make sure I get that done beforehand. Typically, it's a lot of just admin and paperwork things in the morning, and then it depends what we're doing in the day. We do have a day once a week in our school where the children do play pedagogy all morning. So for us, it's a Thursday, so they come in if it's that day. I'm pulling out different resources and things that they can play with. Like we've got sand and building blocks and coding, like all of these things they can go and do. And if it's that day, then the whole morning is spent where they can choose when they do their tasks. So we have maybe like 2 maths and 1 literacy, or a science, a literacy and a maths. It just kind of depends on the day, and it'll be a mixture of independent and teacher tasks. So sometimes they can go and do them on their own at whatever pace they'd like throughout the morning, and other times they have to wait for me to kind of call them out and say that they're coming over for a small group, or they're coming over to do a task with us, or if there was another adult, then out with that. It's very standard. We would have usually maths and literacy in the morning if we can fit it in, and then the afternoon is typically your more, we call it BGE, so broad general education, so things like your music, and that part we would also include your kind of science. We would include computing technologies. They say primary school teachers, the jack of all trades and the master of none, literally teaching everything this year. Sometimes with our non-class contact, you sort of give over an aspect of the curriculum to whoever's covering your class, but the person covering our class is doing like a lot of outdoor learning this year. So this is the first year in a while that I think I've covered pretty much everything. Previous years, it's been maybe the non-class contact teachers taking music, or they've taken French, or they've taken something like that, but this year it's everything. So we go through blocks at the minute where sometimes we're doing a block of art, sometimes we're doing a block of science. It just sort of depends. So right now we're getting close to the summer, so it's a lot of the nicer things that you save for yourself to do at this time of year, so you can kind of look forward to them. So we're doing like art, and we're doing an Olympics topic, so it's a lot of the sort of more active and fun, if you will, things that I've saved for the end of the year.
Fantastic. I love hearing about primary school teachers, just because it is so different to what we do. So a few things I've picked up on there. You said about the fact you get in about 8, which is about an hour before obviously the kids come in, and you do all of your admin. So last episode we spoke to someone that was talking about the research Daniel Pink has done on productivity, and she was talking about the fact that you've got soft tasks. Was it hard tasks or soft tasks, which are essentially the ones that are less cognitively overloading? And the fact that you do those in the morning because they're less cognitively overloading, I think a lot of teachers can sort of start taking that advice on, because we need to do the hard stuff when we've got the brain capacity. And to be honest, at 8 o'clock in the morning, not many people have brain capacity for doing the big job. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. Something I'd quite like you to sort of expand on, if you don't mind, is so am I right in thinking that in primary you sort of have a set lessons you have to do in that day, but you as a class teacher have sort of artistic license as such to do that how you think is suitable for your class?
So I think this would vary from school to schools. Like at our school, we get given guidance at the start of the year of the things we have to do, but we can choose when. So for example, some classes won't be doing art right now. They maybe did it in the first term, or they maybe did it in the second term, but I kind of decided when we're going to do novel study, when we're going to do drama, when we're going to do music, when we're going to do art. Some things kind of just lend themselves to certain terms, so we end up all sort of on the same page. Like music, for example, we do a lot of work around Christmas time, because there's obviously school shows and nativity and all of that, which just lends itself well to music. And then obviously in the summer, outdoor learning's better, doing that if you're doing that towards sort of start of the year or the end of the year when it's a bit nicer weather. I think in Scotland our curriculum's a little bit less prescriptive than in England. So I know I see a lot of primary school teachers using that kind of White Rose Maths curriculum and following that structure. We don't really have that. We don't have like a scheme of work that we follow. So we have got, my local authority, for example, gives us bundled outcomes for maths that we kind of follow in that order, and they give us suggested activities on planners. They kind of break down, our curriculum goes across 3 years. So for example, the primary I'm teaching, they are at the end of their sort of 3-year block because they've been covering first level for the last 2 years. This is their 3rd year of it. So we have like set things, skills that we would say, we also look at like skills through the planner, so skills that they should be able to do at the start, middle and end of this planner, and we teach them in whichever way we see is best suited towards our class and towards who we have in front of us. So sometimes it is textbook work, sometimes it's going outside, sometimes it's active. It just really depends on the class. I said ours is maybe not as prescriptive. I wouldn't say, it's probably a bit more open. Some people like that, some people don't like that. I quite like it because I think it gives you a good opportunity to adapt to your class. You know, every class is really different. So something that worked last year, even if you're in the same stage, might be a really bad idea to do the following year. It just really depends. But we do have, in my school, certainly set hours we need to teach through the week. So we have to teach a certain amount of hours of maths, English, BGE, health and wellbeing. Like we have got the breakdown of the hours, but when we do that, is kind of up to us. So like one morning, I, for example, have my non-class contact in the morning and we have assembly. So we don't really get to do any of our maths learning until later in the day. So we would do it in the afternoon. It's up to us really to decide when and how we do things.
Thank you. That's so fascinating because it's so different for secondary school teachers. Or both the schools that I've worked at, it is so prescriptive. So you have to teach a certain topic on a certain day, and you can basically, the whole year is mapped out, every lesson, every week, and what topic you have to teach. And you kind of have to do it in that order because within science, your curriculum is built a lot around practicals, and your technician can only take on so much. So really, there's only a buffer for moving things, maybe 1 or 2 lessons either way. But people aren't necessarily very happy when you do that. So it's so prescriptive. So I kind of love the idea that you can make your lessons more adaptable to your pupils. I love that idea because it's not something that we actually can really do in secondary school, and you can be a little bit more creative. So I love that. So I'm really interested. Did you always know, that you were going to be a primary school teacher, and why did you choose primary?
So I actually don't think I've got that classic I always wanted to be a teacher. Sorry, I think when you ask people, they always say, oh, I always wanted to do it. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left school. I didn't, sort of towards the end when everyone was applying for universities, I was kind of like, I really don't know what I want to do. I had done some work experience and things in a primary school and I did enjoy it, but my argument was I didn't want to do a primary teaching degree and then end up not liking it, and that's my degree and I didn't have anywhere to go from there. So I remember everyone was applying and I was kind of just burying my head in the sand. I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. And I went to speak to my sociology teacher and I said, I don't think I'm going to bother applying for university. I'll work it out. And he said, you just do something you like, just do something you enjoy. And at that point, politics and sociology, that's what I really liked doing. I liked my modern studies class. I liked all of those. That was the majority of what my kind of advanced hires and hires were in history, all of those things. So I ended up going and doing a politics degree for my undergraduate. And I would say probably a couple of years into that, I thought, I think I do still want to be a primary school teacher. I liked politics. I still enjoy it. I still enjoyed doing that degree, and I'm glad I did it. But it was definitely primary school teaching probably a couple of years in. So I didn't think I was going to actually be in this position as early as I ended up being in. So I applied in my 3rd year. So I didn't actually do my honours year. So in Scotland, we do 4 years for honours instead of 3. So you don't have to do the honours degree. You can just get a regular degree, if you will. So I applied not really thinking I'd get in. I was fully prepared to do my dissertation. I'd kind of planned it out. I'd done my research proposal, all of that. And then got a couple of interviews and ended up getting in. So that was quite nice. I did the postgraduate route into teaching, and I have been at my probation school ever since. Again, that works slightly differently. I know you guys have to apply down south. You have to apply for your first job out of university. So here you just get, I don't want to say just get given it, because you obviously earn it with your degree and then earn it with all the work you've put in. But we basically pick 5 local authorities, which can be really quite hard because some of them are huge. It was a bit of like, we actually had like a map of Scotland out trying to decide which 5 I would put, because you can get your first one or you could get your 5th one. And sometimes the one that's closest to you is also the biggest authority. So like an authority near to me has islands, for example. So I could have gotten that one and be on an island and have to move anyway. So it was a difficult choice, but I got, thankfully, my first choice of local authority. And then I've been at my school since then. That's a bit of a different thing, a different way into it up here. That's a bit of a strange route, but I don't think it was always what I wanted to do, but I'm now obviously very glad that I chose to do it. I think it was the right decision.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I kind of have had a weird route into teaching. I wanted to and then didn't want to. So it's always, everyone's got their own journey, but it always ends up being the right decision. And I love that. Would you mind sharing how many years you've actually been in teaching then? And from your experience, your observations of the education system and have any sort of changes that you would recommend?
So this is my 5th year teaching. I'm about to finish my 5th year of teaching. I think they are very different systems, so that one of the flaws up here certainly is the probation system is good. It works well. However, there's certainly in the local authorities around me, it's very, very difficult to go on to get a job after your probation year, because essentially you're getting 300, 400 teachers leaving from a local authority, and then there's another 300, 400 at the back of you who are coming straight in that don't apply for jobs. They go through the same system. I know that a couple of authorities around me, they've said for the last few years they're not hiring anybody, so that's all of their probationers that are without an opportunity to even interview, and then they will look to other authorities, which sometimes can make people feel a little bit like, I've done my probation year in this authority, so maybe I should be favoured over people who haven't. And it's been really difficult for teachers, certainly since I came in. It's kind of swings and roundabouts. It does sort of go up and down. You'll hear teachers say, oh, it was like this when I qualified. I think when I was at uni, I spent a lot of time hearing, oh, well, you'll always need teachers, you're always going to have a job. And then I very quickly realised out of my probation year that actually it was going to be quite difficult to get a permanent job. Because I was very fortunate that when we got our jobs, or when I got my job, it was just before COVID hit. So literally, I think a week before COVID hit is when I got the news that I had the job, and we went to a pool interview. So it was a group interview. So you went it was at a hotel, and there was 3 panels there, and it was just a cycle for 3 days of people applying for jobs, not necessarily for a specific school. So it was jobs for the authority, and they would put you wherever they needed you, basically, for permanent supply. That's what it was called. And I was just lucky that there was a space at my school, which has ended up being now permanent to that school. So I think in Scotland that's a big thing for me. I think needs to probably change. It's very disheartening, and I think it probably contributes a lot to the reason why teachers are leaving within that first 5 years, because it's not guaranteed. Not that anything's guaranteed, but obviously there's only so long that people can be on a supply list without that sort of guaranteed income. And as much as it's something that needs to change, I don't know how they're going to do it without totally revamping the probation system. I don't see another way out of that. I think in terms of the actual education that we're giving to the children, I think right now we're hearing a lot of big promises from people who make the decisions. I'm not talking head teachers and local government. I mean, the government are making these massive decisions and saying all these things are going to change, but I'm also thinking schools are just one school. They're just 1-2 people that are running the school. There's only the teachers. If you don't kind of put your money where your mouth is, then we're not going to be, you're putting the pressure on your teachers constantly, and your head teachers and your senior leaders, to be able to make these changes, but you're also pulling back a lot of the funding and a lot of the support. Again, another difference is I don't know what it's like in high school, but we don't really have TAs. So we've got classroom assistants who would go to all classes. So they don't just stick with 1 class or 2 classes. So I get, I think, an hour and a half a week support, which can be quite difficult sometimes, and you plan around all of that, but it's a lot to do on your own. And I think people often say teachers are heroes, and you couldn't do it without teachers, but teachers aren't heroes. They're just normal people, and when you say they're heroes, you put that pressure on their shoulders to think, oh, they can fix everything. They're going to come in, they're going to sort it all out, but they can't do it on their own. They need that sort of backing, and they need that support.
Yeah, you've touched on some really pertinent points there, I think. Just to clarify the first bit you were saying about probation. So am I right in thinking, just to clarify, that I've got it correct? So you come out of uni, you then get put in the pool of graduates, essentially, and then you give your top 5 local authorities, and then you get put in a school for a year. And then after that year, your contract is over, and then you have to apply for new jobs. Is that right?
Yes. So we picked our local authorities, I think, in the December before we graduated. There is another route, and you can do a flexible route, which is where you don't necessarily do a probation year. You kind of go in, you do supply, or you sort your own school out, which sometimes if people get the last choice of their probation authority, they will go into the flexible route where they'll try and kind of sort a position out themselves. But the majority of people take the route of probation year. So you put your choices in December, which is a bit strange because you're barely even halfway through your degree, and you're kind of thinking, how can I be making this decision now? I don't even know what's going to happen in the next few months. And they actually just found out their authorities a few days ago. So May usually is about the time that you find out what authority you're actually going to end up in. And then from there, it's just a waiting game to see what school you get. So you don't choose your school. The school just get, again, you've got X amount of probationers for your local authority, and the local authority just kind of put them into these positions, and you just get told, hey, your school is, you get an email literally saying, your local authority is this, and then maybe a few weeks later, a couple months later, it really depends, the school will, or the authority will email you and say, this is your school, you can get in touch with them now. So after that year, yeah, you're right, you're totally on your own, your contract is up, and you have to try and find something. But like I said, I mean, the interview situation right now, the councils are just saying they're not doing any interviews. So there are individual school positions that sometimes crop up, but they sometimes come with a stipulation that probationers can't apply for it because you have to pass your probation year. So your probation year isn't another year of training. You are fully trained, but you do still have to pass it. So you still have your mentor. You get a certain amount of observations, which is more than a kind of fully qualified teacher would get. And you have to fill things out on our online portal, and you basically have to pass that year still. So with the positions that come up that are school specific, they tend to say no probationers, or they sometimes might say that just in case that probationer doesn't pass, they give them the job and then they're back to square one.
That must make the transition then from being in probation to getting your next job really, really difficult, because there's also always that window where schools put out the job adverts, and if you can't apply for that window, then you're in limbo for a little while. That's really, really tough.
I struggle to get my head around the fact that you can't choose your school. Like, every school has different values, and when I go to an interview in a school, I'm looking at what is the priority of this school. What's the senior leadership look like? I want to meet my head teacher. Is this someone I want to work for? I want to meet my line manager. What are they like? All of these things are really important to me. And when I go for an interview, it's not just, oh, am I right for them? It's also, is this school right for me? So I think that's really challenging that you can't choose your school.
Yeah, it's very strange. And I think for me as well, I did my training in a totally different city. So all of my placements were in a completely different local authority. I hadn't worked in the one that I work in now, and every council does things very differently. So our schools aren't funded by trusts or anything like that. We don't work for a trust, we work for the local authority, so we work for the council, and it's quite big differences. I would say everyone works very differently. I've worked across with my placements now 4 different ones, and every single one is done completely different. So when I first started and I got the council I'm in now, my first thought was, that's going to be like starting again, because I've not worked in this local authority. Whereas I know David probably won't mind me saying this, but David worked in a school that he did a placement in because they were able to request him. So he kind of had a head start in knowing, I know how to work this with this local authority. I've seen their planners. I've seen what goes on. I know how the school works. I know the staff. Whereas I literally went in blind. Like, I knew nothing when I started in that local authority. So if you've done a placement and you get that authority, schools can request you, but you can't request a school. Like, you can't go and say, hey, I did a placement here, I'd love to go back. They have to be able to say, this person did a placement here, we'd love to have them back for probation year. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. So it's the same for the school. The school don't know who is coming into their school either. So like the head teacher, for example, wouldn't interview and select from an interview. The head teacher would, in my position, after my probation year, I was selected, but they were able to say, she's been here for a probation year, we want to keep her from this pool of people that you have in permanent supply. Whereas if you're getting a probationer and you've not maybe had any students, or you've not got anyone in mind, then the school don't meet the probationer until they've been allocated the school either. So it kind of works both ways as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for explaining that. You briefly mentioned earlier teacher crisis, which is something that we have in England. And you also mentioned dropping out within the first 5 years. Also happens a lot in England. And from speaking to people on this podcast and online and our friends, a lot of the reasons why people believe this is happening in England is because of workload, number of hours we have to teach a week, stuff that are not really within just the school's control. Like you mentioned earlier, the big decisions that are made by the big people in the government. Is there a teacher crisis where you are, and what do you believe the reasons are for this?
So we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing a lot of people leaving, we're then not replacing those teachers. So that I think is going to become quite problematic, I would imagine, in the next few years. I was reading a white paper recently. I think it was Betts and HP had written it, and they were talking about a global teacher shortage of 44 million by 2030. Like, that's what their prediction is. And I think the issue is, like I said, these people are leaving. We're not retaining people, but we're not replacing them. So certainly here, we're not replacing them, which is going to make life quite difficult, I think, in the near future. I do think workload is probably the biggest issue. Behaviour challenges. I get not very fortunate, not something I've experienced, but I know there's places where that would be, or for some teachers that would be quite a big aspect of it. There's been a lot of shifts in how we manage and deal with behaviour, and I think especially if you're maybe a teacher who's been around, 10 years ago and it's very different now, I think that could potentially be something as well. I think one of the big issues is a lot of the proposed cuts to workload that are given by, your government, things like that. I think they're kind of putting a plaster over something. They don't actually address the issue. A lot of the time with workload, teachers say, the issue is that I can't just teach. Like, I have so much more to do, and you want me to deliver high quality lessons, high quality learning and teaching, but I can't just teach. I can't just get on with that. And saying to me, oh, we'll give you all these pre-planned lessons, or we'll share lesson plans, or, we'll give you this magic tool that's going to fix something, this online program. It doesn't actually just let you teach. It doesn't do any of that. You still have everything else. So I think we need to address how we sort of pull back on the tasks that are non-teaching related, that are taking up all of this time, to allow teachers to do what they enjoy and what they're good at, which is teaching. Let them teach in a way that is going to benefit the children and going to benefit them and benefit the school and benefit everybody, rather than throwing all these extra admin tasks at people that sometimes you sit and think, what's the point in this? Why am I doing this?
Yeah, it's so true. And it's a catch-22, unfortunately. It's one of those things in the teacher crisis. In my opinion, I think we need more teachers so we can reduce teaching timetable in order to do the admin, or reduce the admin, exactly like you've just said. But we all know that reducing the admin is going to be easier said than done. So actually what we need to do is be able to get more teachers in, everyone have a slightly reduced timetable, so that we have the extra 2 hours to make sure the admin is completed, so we can teach lessons to the highest ability. But we can't do that on the hours that we've got. And until that changes, unfortunately, I think that, as the stats are saying, the teacher crisis is just going to get worse, because we physically haven't got the time. So it's either the lessons get worse because we haven't got the time to make them amazing, or the teacher crisis gets worse because people go, well, I can't do it. I'm not given the resources in order to do my job properly, and I'm at burnout, so I'm going to have to leave. And it's sorting that out, really, isn't it?
I totally agree. I was speaking to a teacher the other day that said tick and flick was still in their marking policy, and that she spent about an hour and a half just ticking, just to meet the marking policy that was being checked on Monday. And I just thought, how does this benefit the pupils' learning at all? Like, what a waste of time. And it's things like that. That's an easy fix to me. Just get rid of that. We don't need that at all. Right. So you're obviously doing really well in your career, but then you've also got this thing on the side, your beautifully engaging Instagram and your podcast, which you're a co-host for, which is Inside Voices. So I'd love to know what's inspired you to go into this, and how have you found the time?
So the podcast kind of started, it's a bit of a long-winded story, that it came off the back of social media. So both David and I I kind of started on TikTok as a little bit of a joke, and I deleted it like 100 times, and I got locked out of my original account, which I think has a video of a worry monster on it. It's still out there somewhere. I don't know how to get in and delete it. I've tried like 100 times. I don't know what email I used. No idea. And it started out because we were making kind of digital products. That's what we were doing with a lot of our time. And then the social media side of things sort of just went a bit crazy. And we ran, when we taught together, so we taught a year together, we co-taught, and we ran a pupil podcast. So we had a podcast that the students were in. We ran it through the year, and they were brilliant at it, but we were editing it and things like that. It was good fun. And then it was literally just one day a conversation of, we should just start a podcast. And then we looked into it, and then we didn't really know how it was going to go. We sort of thought maybe one episode a month, one episode every 2 weeks. We'll just see how it goes. Ever since it's been one episode a week, and we've stuck with it. So we film in a studio, and we don't do the editing now, which is quite nice, because that takes up a lot of time. But yeah, it's quite a time consuming thing, but I think it's something that it's opened a lot of opportunities, and I think it pushes you. You'll know from being podcast hosts as well, you get to a lot of good insight into education. I think it's quite easy to kind of come in your bubble, especially with both of us teaching at the same school. It's quite easy to be in a bubble and think our school and the way we do it is the only way it's done. And I think especially at that point in my career, that was the start of the year. We did it and started it in September. And that point in my career, I'm kind of thinking, I've taught this curriculum now for however many years. Like, this is my second year in the same stage. I sort of know what I'm doing. I feel quite confident. I feel like I have got my head around it. And then when we started the podcast, we've spoken to people who are behaviour management experts, we've spoken to people who are maths experts, we've spoken to all these people that just give you like little nuggets of information that you can take and you can build on and you can work with. And it's really insightful to have conversations like this where you hear about what others are doing, because I do think it's quite easy to just be in your own wee world with things. So it is nice to sort of push yourself in that sense, and you do get little snippets of information. You think, oh, that's really interesting, and it's now just something that we enjoy doing, I think, as well. Most importantly, if it ever became something we didn't enjoy, I would imagine we wouldn't be doing it anymore, but it is something that we just enjoy. And it's also nice to just have that. You sometimes feel like you're just venting, which is sometimes just needed, isn't it? It's nice to finish a day and just feel like you're letting off whatever steam has built up through the day.
I completely agree with everything you've just said. It's so nice to do a podcast and have all of that insight. I think we genuinely treat it a little bit like our own CPD off of our own back, because we have learned so much about teaching. And you're right, you think you're in your own little bubble and that's how teaching is done, but the amount we have learned doing this podcast is amazing, and we're exactly the same. We just love it. And yeah, you're right, we probably wouldn't be doing it if we didn't love it, but we've met some amazing people, haven't we, and learned so much.
Yeah, we have. You've obviously had the opportunity to meet and speak to loads of different people, so do you have any key takeaways or anyone that's particularly inspired you, and how you've changed something that you're doing in your life that's made your teaching better? Or
so we had a person on who actually wrote the maths textbooks that we use. Now this is probably more specific to me just because we're using them, and explained the thinking behind the structure of the work. Because I remember asking him, I said, you've got one question in each section or two questions in each section. I feel like the children are getting through it really quickly. And he basically explained the way we were supposed to use these textbooks, and it was the complete opposite way as to what we were doing. So we were able to go back to our school and say, wait, hang on a little minute, guys. We're not doing it the right way. Like, we're not supposed to be doing it in the way we are doing it. And I would say at the start when we introduced the resource, I was kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if I like these or not. And then once we spoke to him, I quite like them because of the way it's designed to sort of tackle learning. It's not supposed to be sit in front of your textbook for an hour. Like, that's not what it was supposed to be designed for. But I think one of the first people we interviewed early on was Iced Tea with Mr. P, Lee. And he was just, I think we had just started the podcast at that point, and we were quite nervous to interview him because it was someone we'd seen on our social media for a really long time. We couldn't actually really believe he'd said yes to coming on, so we were really nervous before this interview. But he just gave so many good pieces of information. As someone that we looked up to a lot, we found out that he struggled in his first years of teaching and his student teaching and nearly gave up. Like, it was nice to hear that and hear that this person that you see on social media, that was our kind of first snippet of that you see on social media all the time, has had the same struggles that a lot of people have had. And at that point, our social medias weren't huge, they were doing well, but they are now. And for me, that was the first sort of moment of realization of saying, these people that you look up to and you see on social media, they are just people, and they have had the same challenges and the same sort of bridges to cross as all of us, even if sometimes you see the positive things. Like, he is very good on his socials, he's very open about things, but sometimes you don't see those ones and you don't believe it almost because you're seeing it on there. But that was just nice to hear that we've all been in that position at some point and things do get better. The best piece of advice he gave was if you're not having a great time in a placement or in a school, it's not your teaching. It's likely just that's not the school for you, and that's okay. You don't need to fit in with every school environment that you're in. So, if you've had a bad placement, don't take it to heart. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's maybe things you need to work on. Like, I definitely in my student teaching would have done something, and when the teacher said, oh, maybe don't do that, I kind of went, okay, right, I'm not good at any of this. I thought that was good. Or you do need to take the advice on board, and you do need to sort of level head and judge if you think it's something that works for you or something you could have done better. But that idea of, if you've had a bad placement or you've had a bad experience, remember there are literally thousands of opportunities out there, and it just might not have been the right one for you.
Thank you. I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations. I look back on my training, 9 months of training that I did to become a teacher, and I've learned so much from social media and listening to conversations that you had with your guests, just quick reels online. It's just been so great how much I've learned, and knowing in that moment where you're like the only ECT in your school and you're really struggling and you feel overwhelmed, and you've got the really big scary year 11 class and the boys are taller than you, and you're like, oh my gosh, are they going to listen to me? I'm super nervous. And then you do see on social media that actually someone else feels exactly the same, and that's really nice, because it's really hard when you first join a school and you're an ECT to think that you have to pretend like you've got it all together and that you're not nervous to your seniors. So it is really nice that we're having these conversations online. And we said earlier that there is a teacher crisis, and I'm hoping that because these things are available to people literally on the other end of their phone now, that we can actually support each other through it. So it is really, really lovely. Right, we do finish every episode on a research bite. So could you please share with us any research or best bit of advice you've ever had with our listeners?
So I was going to do the one about that teacher retention rate, and I was going to give that little nugget that I gave at the start that you said, with people leaving within the first 5 years. And I think with right now, the way things are going, the education system is changing so much. And my biggest piece of advice is always just don't take things personally. I think in my first year's teaching, it's very easy to take things personally, whether it is, you had an observation, you got some feedback, or, maybe you're engaging with an adult or you're engaging with a parent, and it's really easy to take things to heart and think the world is ending because you're not good at what you do because of this one bit of feedback that you've had. But just remember that it's not a personal attack. It's not something that someone's done to hurt you, whether it's a student or, like I said, feedback, anything like that. It's not designed to hurt you. It's designed to make you grow and designed to help you be better. And I think looking at things level-headed is always the best piece of advice I can get. So if you're sitting at the end of the day, you're feeling really overwhelmed, you've maybe not had a great day, you've not had a great lesson observation, don't stay in your classroom and worry about it and panic about it. Go home, do something you enjoy, put yourself first. And then if it takes you a week, if it takes you 2 weeks, once you're out of the negative headspace, look at it neutrally, look at it in a way that you can really see, okay, I can build on that, I can get better at that. Okay, maybe my timings weren't great, okay, maybe my feedback wasn't the best, but here's what I'm going to take and what I'm going to try and change, and here's what I think I personally do well. And make sure you are giving yourself the credit of, if you are doing something well, then it doesn't always need to change. You might need to build on it, you might need to adapt every now and then, but don't be your own worst enemy, essentially, because it's very easy to do that, I think, in this job, especially when it's a job where everyone does it so differently and everything is done differently. I look at David and how he teaches, and we do things completely differently, and it's easy to go down and say, oh, I'm not doing all of that, so I must not be giving my class the same opportunities. I'm not doing as well as I could for them. But it's a job where there are rules. There's obviously a lot of things you have to do, but also how you do those things is vastly different. So don't worry too much if what you're doing isn't the exact same as someone on social media or someone in the classroom next door, because taking stock of your own strengths and areas for improvement is probably one of the most important things in teaching.
Thank you for sharing that. As you were speaking, I was just reflecting on my ECT years. And I remember saying to my partner, I was like, okay, so I'm doing 3 lessons a day and I'm getting observed, and then they give me feedback. So that's 3 times a day. I was like, it's really hard to hear 3 times a day that you're still not good enough. And I remember having to try and shift my mindset so that they're not telling me that I'm not good enough. They're just trying to make me grow. But it is hard because I think as a human reaction is to just take it personally, and to have that 3 times a day is hard, but it's all about changing that mindset. And then I remember also having the conversation which was, I was being observed by many different teachers, and many different teachers were telling me different things. And I struggled with that when I first started, because I was like, what is the right thing to do? No one in my family was a teacher, so I couldn't really chat to them. So I was getting all flustered and panicky at home when I was chatting through it over dinner with my partner. And then again, I just had to go through that process of realizing, right, I need to work out what teacher I need to be and what works for me. And like you said, it is completely different for everyone. And if you're doing something differently, it doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just right for you.
I was just going to add to that. Obviously, I've been a mentor to trainee teachers for 4 years now, and I'm an induction tutor as well. So I now oversee all of the mentors that look after the trainees, and I do sometimes take on some trainees personally myself. And what you said really resonated with me. It's one of the biggest things that I see happen with a lot of trainees. They'll get given their feedback, which will have lots of positives, but it will obviously also have constructive criticism in there as well. And it's a really instant thing that all trainees do. They grab onto the bit that was saying, this is your constructive criticism, and they hang on to it. And they either come back with a defensive, or they might come back with but I thought I was doing this. And actually, I think what all 3 of us have said, it's don't take it as a negative, take it as an opportunity to grow. So that person in front of you that's your mentor is there to help you grow, and their constructive criticism absolutely should be, this is what I saw, this is what happened, and this is the impact it had on the learners, and actually this is how we are going to improve it. And your mentor is there to show you how to do that, and they will help you use your way of teaching. So yes, your mentor will have their way of teaching, but as a mentor, they should be able to mold it into a way that suits your classroom. And ECTs, absolutely, if you don't feel like you're getting shown how to do it or the right advice, like, you're absolutely in your right to speak up and say, can you show me how to do that? Can I drop into your lesson and see how you do it? Do you know if there's anyone else in the school that does it, so I can drop into their lessons to see what it looks like, and then I'm going to try it in my lesson. And actually, do you mind coming in a few more times to see if I've done it correctly, or if I can have some more advice? And I think it's so important. Your ECT or your training years are there to make mistakes. It is a learning journey that you are absolutely allowed to make mistakes and get it wrong, or get it not quite right, or it doesn't feel quite right, and just have another go, and have another go, another go, and just keep using the professionals that are around you to help you get it right. So yeah, I'm really happy you brought that up, Rose. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part that you said, that your ECT years, your probation years, they are used to grow. And I sometimes think there was a time in my probation year, and I just remember it so vividly, that I can't, there was something that had happened in the morning, and children were in because it was a wet break time. And I went downstairs, and my only option was to go into the staff room, and someone just looked at me and went, "Are you okay?" And I burst into tears, and I was so embarrassed because all these staff sitting there, and I just said, I can't do this. Like, I'm gonna leave. I can't do this. And one of the members of staff was like, "You're gonna look back on this in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, a year, and say that's made you stronger, that's made you better." And at the time, I totally didn't believe it, like, at all. And also, one of the staff members on the way out said, "I'll go," and they had their non-class contact. They said, "I'll go and get your class. You don't need to go up to class." And I just thought that was really lovely thing to do. But I had like 2 seconds to pull myself together and make it look like I hadn't been crying for 20 minutes. And I just thought that was the kind of compassion and kindness you needed to be shown. And I do now look back on that and I say, do you know what? I am able to deal with this situation now, which crops up every now and then, and I can deal with this a bit more confidently, and I can deal with this knowing that that experience made it so. That experience is what made me feel more confident in it now. So at the time, although it was really not nice and I didn't enjoy it and it really got me down, I am glad it happened, because I wouldn't be able to now stand here and say, okay, I'm confident dealing with that situation because if it arises, I've had all this experience of it. So if you have had something like that, you might not believe it, but you will look back on it in a couple of years or a year or even next week and say, do you know what, that needed to happen.
Really interesting that you said about the crying, because I remember when I started my first teaching role, so I was unqualified. It was my first teaching role straight out of university. So I was doing my PGDE on the job, and I walked in, and so many teachers said to me, they were like, right, if you need a cry, you come and see me. If you're struggling and you just need to let all the tears out, come and see me. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for? But the reality is that teaching is stressful, and we are hard on ourselves because we want to be the best we can. And actually knowing that you have that someone to go and cry to, and actually it's the whole staff body, because sometimes we just need a little cry and we're absolutely fine. But knowing that everyone is in the same boat, and if you go and cry, everyone's like, it's fine, it's just going to make you stronger, and you've got this, so don't worry about it, and I'll go and look after your class, so don't panic. It just puts you at ease. And I think every trainee teacher needs to remember that they can have a little cry and it's okay.
Mine said exactly the same. I remember they were like, you are going to cry and that's fine. And I remember thinking, what? Like, I'm going to cry? I'm going to cry? Is this horrible? 2 months later, I was crying in her office, and that's fine. But if she hadn't had that conversation with me at the start, I think I would have been too embarrassed to go and cry. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you?
Of course, I'm on social media, so it's Teach with Mrs. F on Instagram. There's an underscore at the bottom of it, or the end of it. And then the podcast is Inside Voices. So that's the places I tend to be.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for our lovely listeners who have joined us again for another episode. We hope to see you next Wednesday.